Well, good afternoon. Good morning to our colleagues on the West Coast. I'm Allison Griffin. I'm a Senior Vice President with Whiteboard Advisors, and I'm joined today by three esteemed colleagues to talk about the idea of rethinking education finance. I'm really excited to have three colleagues from across the country join us today. John Bailey, who is a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Venice Davis, who's a venture partner at Imaginable Futures, and Chris Keaveney, the CEO and founder of Meritize. Thank you all so much for being with me and being with our audience today to talk about some really important issues around how students and learners, I should say learners, are financing higher education and training. I think as many of us know, millions of jobs have been lost as a result of the pandemic, and those jobs may never come back. And a number of Americans are actually thinking about how they are going to up and reskill into entirely new roles and perhaps even new industries. Of course, we know that the unemployment crisis is going to put unprecedented pressure on education and workforce infrastructure. And in many ways, workers and learners are trying to figure out not only how do they upskill and reskill, but how do they pay for that training. And so today we are going to talk about some of the risks and opportunities associated with new models of education finance, income share agreements, merit-based financing, outcomes-based funding, the opportunity, no pun intended, that we have with opportunity zones across the country. And really begin to answer some of the questions and surface some of the issues that our policymakers, education, and industry leaders are thinking about when deploying these types of finance programs to learners in, through, and hopefully post-pandemic. So really excited to have each of you with us. I'm going to just start with a quick overall question. I'm going to actually ask the question and then turn to John first to get us going. So the topic of rethinking the way we finance education and training was already a big issue before the pandemic, but now it seems to be more timely than ever, given the landscape that I just provided. Could you talk a little bit about the work that you are doing in this space, and what makes this moment in time really different when we begin to think about new ways of education finance?
It's great. Thank you, Elsa. Thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I know you're all sort of pressed for time, and so just value the fact you're giving us some of your precious resources today. I mean, I think, there's been this trend that has been growing over the last almost 2 decades in terms of demand for credentials that mean something to employers. And that in turn has led to this just amazing sort of growth of different types of providers. So not just community colleges, not just 4-year institutions, but initially we saw like this initial wave of boot camps, and then we're seeing now these waves of 2-year programs that really sort of do compete with community colleges that offer a credential that means something to a set of employers. And the challenge has been, for a number of these providers, they don't have the benefit of being able to participate in a lot of the federal financial aid programs. And so they had to find other alternative financing mechanisms. So for a lot of people, that ended up becoming income share agreements because it was a way of aligning institutional incentives with student success. And I know we'll talk all about that. But all of this was being driven, frankly, by this notion of employers were demanding better credentials that signified some set of skills. You had learners that wanted the best, fastest, and easiest type of pathway for them that accommodated their schedules and their needs and their challenges at that particular point. I sort of think like that was the picture heading into COVID. If anything, COVID is going to accelerate a lot of that work. And it's because you have a lot of people who have been displaced, and some of them are going to get hired back very quickly. But we're seeing millions and millions of people that are becoming more permanently separated from employers. And simultaneously, we're seeing a lot of employers that are doubling down and investing in the types of automation, the types of tools that is going to change elements of work and elements of the workplace, and is only going to drive up the skills for the new jobs that are created post-COVID. And so the urgency at which to help make sure people have the skills they need to find work is even more important now than it was before COVID.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, for laying that foundation and talking a little bit about where your focus has been over the last few months. Chris, I'd like to turn to you to answer the same question. Just give us a brief overview of the work that you've been doing on these issues and what makes this moment in time really different from where we were even 5 months ago.
Yeah, thanks, Allison, and thanks to John and Denise for joining, and everyone who's taken the time to listen to us. As far as the work we've been doing, Meritize was founded around the concept of finding a way to evaluate whether someone is likely to be successful in the course of study that they're pursuing, right? And I'll try to keep this very brief because I love talking about this. But when you think about educational finance in general, and I know we'll get into certain topics here today, the model has always been, for folks who need what's called gap funding, you look at credit, right? And in a student lending model, there's really a couple of risks that don't exist in other asset classes, right? The risk that you complete the studies that you're undergoing, the risk that you can't find employment with the skills that you've gotten once you do complete, and then the risk that whatever income you're making in the job that you get isn't sufficient to make it a positive ROI investment in that education. And credit doesn't help with any of that really when you talk about education, educational finance. So Meritize has been working to create access to these pathways to education by attacking each of those risks specifically. And we do it through, pretty innovative ways of assessing someone's grit, right? Not whether they got A's or B's in high school, but were you successful at what you've tried to accomplish? And what we found is that it creates a significant amount of marginal access, and the results are actually very, very strong. To the second part of the question, I think COVID, I'll paraphrase a little bit of what John said, I believe, is that it's just accelerated the need for a lot of this, right? It's a little bit like Newton's third law, right? Like inertia is hard to build. This COVID and the pandemic has actually forced folks to rethink what they're doing. We saw it to a certain extent in the financial crisis as well. And so the need for these innovative pathways is just much more acute now than it was 5 months ago.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about the work that you're doing at Meritize and also helping to set the stage for the conversation. I'm going to turn Venice to you. We'd love to hear about what you're working on, how you approach the idea of innovative finance, and certainly, in your opinion, how the landscape has changed in the last 5 months.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So as you mentioned, I work with Imaginable Futures, which is a venture of the Omidyar Group. So we're a global philanthropic investment firm that believes that learning has the power to unlock human potential. And we take a systems change approach and work across public, private, and social sectors. In the US, we have a 2-generational strategy. So we seek to improve family well-being across what we call our littlest learners, so ages 0 to 5, and adult learners. Our focus on adult learners specifically targets those adults who are raising children, so also known as student parents. So these are individuals who are working and pursuing their post-secondary education while being a parent, which has only been made more complex due to the pandemic. These are individuals that are working on traditional degrees, so associate's and bachelor's degrees, but also certificates and alternative pathway programs, including workforce solutions. We look at re-enrollment. So there's around 40 million or so people in the US who currently have some college credit, but no degree, but also have a high level of student loan debt. And have a really significant challenge repaying that debt, and are more likely to default than students who have completed a degree and are employed. We also look at degree and credential attainment, economic mobility, and overall well-being. So data shows that investing in the post-secondary success of those who are raising children leads to a doubling of income for the parent. And also a $1,000 increase in household income can result in upwards of 27% increase in child cognitive development. And single mothers who complete their bachelor's degree are predicted to earn more than $600,000 overall in their lifetime compared to those who have a high school diploma. So degree attainment, credential attainment, not only is important for the adult and the parent, but it also has intergenerational impacts as well. What makes this moment unique is that there are about 32 million or so people who are currently unemployed due to the pandemic. And unfortunately, what we know is that, based on the reports, is that it will get worse. And many of the jobs that are lost or have been lost may never recover. And so we have millions of people that need to be retrained and upskilled. And what really keeps me up at night is that I believe that this pandemic will exacerbate the massive inequities that already exist in our system. So we have a $1.6 trillion student loan debt crisis in this country. And while right now, many of them don't have to repay their loans due to the stimulus package, we know that that's going to expire pretty soon. And we have a default issue in this country, and that's only going to be exacerbated once the millions of people who aren't able to go back to work are now then forced to start repaying back some of those student loan debt. So looking at alternative ways for adult and working learners to be able to finance their education is really interesting, and happy to talk more about it later on in the panel.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you laying that foundation for your work and our conversation. I'm actually going to turn it back to John to kick us off. John, some of those who are tuning in today may know that you have a previous role as a White House domestic policy advisor. And so I'd like to just jump back in time a little bit. You had a front row seat to some of the policy issues that were discussed and implemented relating to improving the affordability of higher education and accessibility to workforce training. How has the landscape evolved over the last 2 decades? And why do you think that alternative finance mechanisms are gaining traction? You touched on that a little bit in your introductory comments, but I'd like you to weave that into maybe a sort of backwards view of where we've been and how some of those early policies may have actually laid the foundation for innovative finance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a little bit of an irony, but I think it could be promising too. The last time the Higher Education Act was reauthorized was in 2008. When I was at the White House, we were in the midst of a financial crisis that had been unprecedented. And HEA reauthorization was overdue. And if that feels very similar to right now, like it's because it is. HEA is reauthorization is overdue. We thought there was a chance of maybe happening this year, and then the pandemic happened. But I think, as we saw back in 2008, like maybe this is the chance and the impetus to get HEA over the finish line. Like I'm hopeful on that, but obviously, you know, Congress is juggling a lot. But in part, like what helped get it over the finish line in 2008 was the fact that you had people who are unemployed. You needed to do different types of job training and make college more affordable. But also back in 2008, we just didn't have some of the more flexible pathways of providers that we have now, that we have today. And so, you know, I think part of what HEA reauthorization, and maybe that's part of what gets packaged into this next economic relief package, is more flexibility with Pell Grants in terms of being able to do short-term programs. I am super hopeful that maybe we're able to see the bipartisan ISA protection Act included in either an HEA reauthorization, or if it's possible, like more importantly, as part of one of these economic packages, because this is literally once in 100-year economic catastrophe that's facing the country right now. And with the millions of people that are unemployed and need a pathway We need to be having an all hands on deck in terms of the policies that we make available to help meet that demand. And it just feels like ISAs are going to be a real important part of that. The other issue that's been obviously debated and percolating for the last, I think it's been more than 10 years now, but is the whole idea of free college and how to make college more affordable. The only challenge I have with making college like free, the free college proposals is free doesn't necessarily mean better. And if anything, we have this sort of unprecedented, but not really fully recognized higher education dropout problem where too many students are enrolling and they get started towards their higher ed journey, and then they stop out, they drop out, and then they have some college credit, but no degree, no economic boost from it. In the worst case, they actually have some debt. But I worry about a lot of free college proposals making that issue kind of worse, flooding an already leaky pipeline. But that's obviously going to be a big issue that we end up debating this year and in the years to come here.
For sure. Thank you for that perspective. And I think similarly, John, to your historical perspective, Chris, earlier in your career, you were a senior leader in the student lending space. And I think you saw up close how the economic recession impacted students and borrowers in particular. So how has that experience informed your perspective around the needs of learners right now and what you described to be the work that Meritize is doing?
Yeah, it's back in the financial crisis. I was working in the educational finance industry as well. So it's very different causes of this, but in some respects, this is kind of like deja vu all over again. And what happened then, and what is likely to happen now, is you're going to see states cut funding for public education across the board, probably affect all levels of education. And schools are not going to be in a position where they are cutting tuitions commensurately. It's going to increase the need for payment methods for schools, whether it be traditional or non-traditional post-secondary education. And what we saw in the crisis is that it was, undoubtedly a major driver of the buildup of student loan debt, which exists today, right? I think, student loan debt is roughly 2x what it was in 2007, right? And, a lot of that was driven by what occurred to funding during the financial crisis. Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more that the real issue here is folks who start school, amass debt, and don't finish, right? So, we could spend some time talking about how you break down that $1.6 trillion of debt. 1.5 of it is through federal programs. Somewhere close to 40 to 50% of that is grad plus loans. So these are, folks who have financed post-secondary degrees, very expensive, but typically are for positive ROI educations. The other half, you have half of those folks who haven't been able to finish. And think about buying a car and the car falls apart the minute you drive it off the lot. Like, you have debt and no collateral. So really what struck me working in educational finance during this crisis is that the issue is making sure that the collateral is valuable, the education, right? And thinking about it as an investment. And so in my mind, not all debt is bad debt, right? There are things that are worth investing in. And what we have focused on, like myopically, is trying to channel people towards educations and ways to pay for that education that make it a positive ROI decision. It becomes an investment rather than debt. And I think that is really at its core the way that we need to tackle the issue that sits in front of us.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you. I want to turn Venice to you, and then I would love to, have a conversation together about some of these issues. And then I want to start teasing out some of the innovative finance models that we're here to talk about today. But Venice, you talked a lot about the work that Imaginable Futures is doing in support of parent learners. And so when we think about the challenges that they face when both either, I guess, returning to work or finishing college, starting training programs that can help them earn more to support their families. My experience in talking to you and following your work is that in large part, they are individuals who are in that some college, no degree population. And so can you provide a little bit more background on the work you're doing, particularly with parent learners, how you're helping to support their education and training trajectories, and where you see there to be opportunities to support them financially in ways that perhaps we haven't been thinking about in the kind of pre-COVID environment?
Absolutely. One of the things I like to say is that the student parent story is the unknown American story. There are millions and millions of individuals who are raising children and are duly motivated to pursue their post-secondary dreams, not only for themselves, but for their families. So about 4 million students who are parents are currently enrolled in traditional undergraduate degree programs. That represents 25%, nearly 25% of the overall undergraduate degree population. And that some college credit but no degree, student parents make up a significant portion of that. Then there's also the 10 to 20 million or so individuals who are working on the non-degree credentials, and parents make up a significant portion of that. So it's upwards of a 20 million individual population. And it's really important that we kind of share more of those stories, because once we share more stories about student parents, you begin to connect with other individuals and realize, oh, I know someone who's a student parent, or maybe I was a product of a student parent. So when we look at the work that we're doing, we use what's called a 6C framework to assess investments that address the unique needs of this population. We really believe that if systems and solutions are able to address the barriers of student parents, they will inherently address the barriers of most other populations. And I will speak about the framework, but I'll also talk, because I'm an investor, I will also share information from our portfolio as well as our pipeline as well. So the first C is childcare, right, which makes parent learners significantly unique compared to other populations. So drop-in childcare, full-time childcare, those sorts of solutions increase completion by 3%. Convenience. Student parents face what's called shredded time, and so they have a lot less time on their hands to complete school, work, family, household duties, etc. And so solutions and models that offer flexibility and convenience, that offer degrees and credentials that are connected to an in-demand career are really important. So 25% of parenting students are enrolled exclusively in online post-secondary programs. So places such as Southern New Hampshire University, Arizona State University, Western Governors University offer this flexible option for many adult learners, specifically parents. Other organizations such as edX, Make School, and SkillSmart are offering affordable opportunities for working adult learners to get degrees or stackable credentials. The third C is connection to career. So solutions that directly address the need to connect that degree or credential to an in-demand career. So one of our investees, which is Handshake, really democratizes access for students all over the country to be able to connect with large and small employers and essentially evaluate their skills and their competencies virtually. And this was before COVID. So there is a need now more than ever to ensure that learners are connecting what they're learning to an actual career that offers some sort of social, professional, and economic sustainability and mobility. So we've seen solutions such as Skill Up and Opportunity for at Work, so Opportunity at Work, I apologize, have recently launched, which are focused on retraining the learners who have been impacted by the pandemic and connecting them directly to in-demand jobs and careers. Completion time, which is very similar to convenience. There are solutions that address convenience time by implementing competency-based education programs such as Rivet School, which is formerly Concourse Education, which is a hybrid college, a recent winner of our RISE Prize, and offers a bachelor's degree to working adults in as little as 2 to 3 years for as little as $10,000. So that's a solution that is innovative, but also couples with the traditional system that offers learners an opportunity for an affordable degree. We know that working learners need community of support. So supports around mental health, supports around coaching, peer-to-peer coaching or coaching within a program. So for example, Peloton U, which is based in Austin, Texas, provided pre-COVID in-person coaching and has now switched to virtual coaching. And last but not least is cost. So innovative financing solutions. So every year, 3 million students are forced to give up their degree because of financial burdens of $500 or less. So offering solutions where emergency aid funding is really critical to the completion for millions of students. We recently invested in a solution called Equity. It's a tech-based platform that colleges and universities can purchase that will allow the system to receive, review, approve, and disperse critical emergency aid in less than 48 hours. So it's a system that is really key. What's interesting is that the CARES Act offered $7 billion to universities to provide for emergency aid. So recognizing even at a federal level that emergency aid is critical to completion has actually been really helpful as it relates to the conversation around emergency aid.
Excellent. Thank you for that overview. I hadn't thought about all those issues that we have been talking about for some time, even before the pandemic, in the category of C's. So thank you for organizing that, not just for your portfolio, but actually for the conversation today. Really appreciate it. So I want to let our audience know that we are happy to receive your questions. If you would use the Q&A box, we'll be tracking those questions, and I'm happy to share some of those with our panelists today. But as folks are thinking about what you want to ask our panelists, I want to turn to John and ask you to talk a little bit about both the structure of an ISA. What is an ISA? How is it used as a lever for finance? And then also the work that you've been doing and writing about with regard to opportunity zones, and what what's truly the opportunity there for working learners.
That's great. Yeah, it's always hard to talk about opportunity zones and not use the word opportunity. So yeah. So ISAs are, if you think about student loans as being debt financing, you can sort of loosely think about ISAs as being like equity financing, that a student learner receives an ISA, and it's essentially a contract that pledges a certain % of their income once they graduate, once they get placed into a job, and usually once that job meets a minimum income threshold. And so the reason I've been just super drawn to this is that without a lot of regulatory complexity, you've just totally aligned the institution's incentives with the student's success incentives, meaning the institution doesn't get paid unless the student completes. The higher the salary the learner gets once they complete a program, the faster the provider gets paid back. And so it just very neatly aligns the incentives and helps address some of that completion and dropout crisis that we were talking about before. And it does it in a way that, again, a lot of traditional higher education or traditional loans don't do. A lot of loans, Pell Grants, they all pay for the promise that a student will complete. And the institution largely gets paid regardless of whether the student completes or not, or if the student gets into a job, or if the student makes an income threshold. The other benefit with ISAs is that there's a lot of flexibility for life once they graduate, once they get a degree. As we're seeing right now, that if there's a time period when a student, a learner loses their job, or there's an economic shock, there's a pandemic, and it's more difficult to pay back. If their incomes get below that level, they don't have to necessarily pay back. Now, that's how it works in theory. Now, obviously, we're going to need a lot of regulatory clarity, and that's part of the reason why I think it's like just incumbent on this Congress to pass legislation very quickly to be able to create the guardrails we need to protect students, but also the certainty that we need to unlock the investment capital to be investing in these learners and these students at this particular time. So hugely important there. Opportunity zones are like a very different type of policy, but part of the reason I was like so fascinated with opportunity zones is that even before COVID, we were 10 years into the economic recovery. And if you looked at most of the headlines, it just talked about the economic recovery was steaming along, unprecedented and historic job growth. But if you sort of peered beneath those averages, what you saw is that there were pockets of this country that were still woefully left behind, that for many of them, they had not caught up to their pre-2008 firm job levels, their job creation levels. There were pockets of just persistent poverty where people were struggling. And if anything, we've seen over the last like 10 years is a lot of research from Raj Chetty and Opportunity Insights. The Legatum Institute just released something this week called the Prosperity Index. Whatever sort of index you use, you'll find parts of this country are just highlighting that there are areas that are struggling to thrive, and the people within those communities are struggling. And so opportunity zones was a way of trying to create a tax incentive for investors to invest in these distressed communities. There's 8,700 designated communities like that across the country. What's fascinating is that there's there's about 379 colleges that are located in or right next to opportunity zones. And that's everything from big colleges like Arizona State University to smaller institutions. A lot of HBCUs, about 47 HBCUs are in an opportunity zone. What that means is like this just gives them another financial tool to leverage with building improvements, to leverage on community improvements, to help their students succeed and to help their communities thrive. In fact, I think we're seeing a lot of colleges are being an anchor institution, meaning they're the ones that can have the very important conversations with their communities about what type of investment and development is needed to help those communities thrive. Arizona State University is doing an amazing job of that in Arizona, and I know there's colleges across the country that are doing the same thing. But it really feels like opportunity zones are going to be part of the economic recovery playbook as we continue to try to find ways to help make sure that communities are thriving, not just during COVID, but post-COVID.
Thank you. And in a second, I'm going to turn to Chris because I want to talk a little bit about the merit-based financing framework. But John, I'm curious, as you were describing ISAs and then described opportunity zones and the institutions potentially being the central player in some of those communities, and maybe even some of the workforce development organizations and centers. Do you see there to be an interplay between ISAs and opportunity zones and finding ways perhaps to leverage capital in those communities to stand up an innovative finance program?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Like, I mean, one of the challenges with these distressed communities is that many of them just have declining job rates, and you know, the whole idea of opportunity zone capital is that you can start investing in entrepreneurs and help grow new jobs. But the obvious question is, like, as jobs return to these communities, what is going to be the workforce training to help people transition into those jobs? And so obviously universities are going to play an important role there, but so could a lot of providers that rely on ISAs as a way of offering financing to people in those communities. One good example of that is Kenzie Academy. They're a 2-year program that's based in Indianapolis. They're headquartered right directly in an Indianapolis opportunity zone. And it's not that they're using opportunity zone capital necessarily for their model, but by just being there, they're helping people in that opportunity zone and frankly throughout the state with helping to get the skills they need to take advantage of some of the high-tech jobs that are entering Indiana. And so I think we could see a lot of different examples like this popping up around the country.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Chris, I just want to turn to you and talk a little bit more, unpack the merit-based financing approach that you started to describe at the beginning of our conversation. I think Venice alluded to it. You further elaborated on the issue of college cost and affordability of higher education. How does that merit-based approach and the work that you have been leading really help to mitigate some of the rising cost of post-secondary education and what the student is actually bearing when they pursue a post-secondary program?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'd like to touch on one thing that John said, though, if I could, which is,
yeah,
I think
make this a conversation. That's great.
It's an absolutely critical point, which is the alignment of incentives, right? I think that's another concept that is problematic in educational finance, which is you have, typically you have a student, you have a school, you have, in many cases, a lender, which could be the Department of Education, could be a private lender or whatnot. But if all three of those parties don't have, interests that are aligned, which ultimately are the success of the student and the ability to repay, you have a paradigm that's not going to work, right? And John talked about ISAs, and I agree that having the schools share in the risk of a successful outcome for the student via an ISA vehicle is conceptually a really good way to think about it. But I know we're not here to get into the minutia around some of these things, but what's happening in the ISA market now, which I think creates some questions, is that there are financial vehicles that are being created that repackage these and sell them off, and so that the schools are not participating in the risk directly. And I think that moving into the merit-based model, one of the things that we hold very closely here at Meritize is the schools have to share in the risk, right? And we do it a couple of different ways, and some of them are conceptually similar to ISAs, but I think it's important that we always have schools aligned with successful outcomes of students. And I think anyone who's worked in this area will know that there's a pretty wide variance in how schools think about that, right? And so it's a little bit of a forcing function. But in terms of the merit-based approach, this is something that I started working on in 2007. The financial crisis got in the way of me being able to kind of dedicate time and resources to it. But over the course of a decade, we were able to conduct a lot of quantitative research around what are the correlations between someone's academic progression and these positive outcomes, like finishing school, finding employment, and having the ability to repay whatever debt they had to take on to get that education. And we were able to use a data set that I'm not aware of it existing in any other form, but over 2 million student records over the course of a long period of time, some of it up to 10 years, where we could look in depth at, not GPAs, not what you majored in, but things like consistency, your pace at getting through your education. And we've since been able to expand that to look at people's high school records. We look at people's GED records. Like, there's a lot of information associated with obtaining a GED that is indicative to, the likelihood of you being successful in whatever course of study you're interested in. We focus mainly on what we call skills-based sectors, so outside of the traditional post-secondary space. But the quantitative methods that we use show this over and over again, that there are ways to assess the likelihood that someone's going to be successful that are much more inclusive and much more appropriate than looking at someone's credit record. right? And so the model that we've put together and we've been employing since we started this company 4 years ago is allowing people to invest in their education, based on looking at their previous educational record. About a third of the folks we get have high school diplomas as their highest level. About a quarter or so have some college. So some of the people Venice were talking about, we have 5 to 10%, which are GEDs. We have, another 25% who have completed college or are now looking to get reskilled. And then we also will evaluate someone's military record as well. So we have a growing number of veterans that we're able to serve by looking at their service record. Mm-hmm. What we found is that we can provide funds for folks to invest in their education in many cases where they would not be available to them under a traditional credit-based approach.
Sure.
One of the great things is most of the programs we work with are shorter in nature. They're not traditional 4-year programs, so we get accelerated learning about this. The interesting thing is that when you look at the blended completion rate of the schools at which our customers go to, the completion rates that we see are 15 to 20% higher than the overall completion rates for those schools. And so, we're finding folks that have the desire and the willingness to work, and we're giving them that opportunity to go and get that. And, at the end of the day, I think that's really what gets us over the hump with this perceived student debt crisis, is giving people the opportunity to be successful.
Great. Thank you for that overview. And I think that you've actually touched on also just some of the challenges that both John and Venice have alluded to pre-pandemic, but also in this current environment. And some of the questions that are being asked by our panelists, and I know have been asked by the broader community, are in relation to the protections and legal and regulatory frameworks around some of these new tools and new models. And so, Venice, I know that you have been doing a lot of thinking and having a lot of conversations with folks in this space about innovative finance models, particularly some of the cautions and considerations when we are deploying these tools with communities who may be more vulnerable in their education and training pursuits. Can you talk a little bit about some of those considerations?
Absolutely. And I appreciate both John and Chris talking about ISAs and some of the benefits. And I just want to hit on 2 additional. One includes the downside protection. And so an income threshold where if a student doesn't get a job over a certain salary, then they're not obligated to pay back that ISA. The second is that ISAs oftentimes are able to increase access to students who are not eligible for Title IV, DACA students, formerly incarcerated students, and students that may have, quite frankly, a poor credit score or poor credit history. But ISAs are not a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination. As you mentioned, they're not regulated. There are no policies. It's really difficult right now for a consumer to look at an ISA to determine what is a good ISA from what is a bad ISA. While many ISAs offer transparency, you can go to their website and do calculations, it's often really difficult to compare this ISA with another one. Also, there's really no consumer protections, or there are no consumer protections. The other challenges is that right now, the ISA ecosystem is filled with lots of amazing good actors, organizations and institutions that are really aligned around this idea of creating and increasing access to students who may not otherwise have an opportunity to access higher education. So places like Make School and Mentor Works, Holberton School, Flock J, These are organizations and institutions that really want to create access for individuals. But if we have one bad actor or multiple bad actors that come into the system, that could destroy the entire ISA ecosystem. Also, there's also really limited research right now in the ISA ecosystem. So how do we know that it's creating or increasing access? How do we know that it's actually, the system is actually working? There are a few RCTs that are being done. I know Rivet School out in California is working on an RCT right now, but there are a lot of challenges potentially with this. And for, let's say, for investors, right, who are investing in ISAs, ultimately they want to get a return. And so is there a way in which you have this adverse selection where you're actually providing access to individuals who already would have had access to multiple financing solutions, or is it creating access to individuals who may not have otherwise other solutions to finance their higher education? These are lots of questions in this space.
And I'm glad that you raised all of those considerations in this conversation with both Chris and John, who have been involved in the, I'd say, more traditional financing space of years prior. And I think that decades of work that went into establishing legal and regulatory frameworks for both the federal student loan program, but also the private lending program. And so I guess I turn it to both of you. Hearing what some of Venice has rightfully elevated as concerns in ISA space, or maybe just for innovative finance more broadly, where are there opportunities to continue to think forward with new models? What is needed to be able to ensure that consumers are protected, that the broader innovative finance space remains viable, and we begin to bring some really needed solutions to how students are paying for much of what we've talked about today, particularly short-term education and training programs? What's your best advice based on your historical experience?
Yeah, John, if you don't mind, I'll jump in and then you can cut me off. I know the audience would probably like you to cut me off, but the piece of this. So first of all, I think Venice is right. There is no silver bullet. There is no perfect, at least in my opinion, there is no perfect way to do it. And what works for one, sector may not be the right approach for another sector, and it may vary from individual to individual. I think that the best advice I could give is that folks should think about pursuing whatever education they're after as an investment, right? And you should do the work. And frankly, as an industry, we need to do a better job of providing information that allows people to do the work relatively easily to understand what the return on an investment is, right? Whether it's an ISA or a traditional loan or whatnot, if you're going to school and you're going to spend $100,000 on a degree that leads to a job that doesn't provide an income that supports that level of debt, that's a problem. And that happens a lot today, right? And that is in a lot of cases what exacerbates the issue. And so I would say we have to do a better job of showing what the return on investment is until the day where colleges are willing to price their programs differently that are in line with the market conditions on the back end. But I've had that conversation with too many schools to know that that's going to happen anytime soon.
Very good point. Thanks, Chris. John, your thoughts?
Well, I would suggest that we need to continuously be exploring solutions that help individuals that have just been underserved by traditional systems, traditional financial aid. And that was before COVID. It's going to be exacerbated during COVID and post-COVID. And so whether it's ISAs or it's other innovative financing means, we need a regulatory system that is more flexible. Like what I worry about is that we're regulating against a lot of hypotheticals as opposed to creating space to try new approaches, learn from it, and then scale up accordingly or scale down accordingly. We do that in other parts of the financial sector. And for some reason, we're just not, we don't have a similar sort of framework here in terms of human capital in the way that we have innovative financing there. But like whatever the financing mechanisms are that we continuously explore, I just think it has to be aligned with student success. That more and more of the post-secondary and higher ed financing looks a lot like healthcare financing. It's a lot of fee for service and not paying for outcomes. And we're seeing prices skyrocket and students not being served. And for all the critics with ISAs, it's not as if some of the other traditional loans are working really well in terms of adequately serving low income, minority, first generation, single parents in terms of pursuing their higher education dreams too. This is just fundamental to us as a country. The only way we are going to keep the economic engine revving and the economic mobility ladder and helping people climb that is with skills and making sure we have the best skills training system in the world. And financing that is going to go a long way. So I would just encourage that even if Congress is not interested in doing a whole scale, creating the regulatory framework for ISAs, use this opportunity with COVID, use this opportunity to seed some experiments as part of one of these next economic packages. Let us learn from it, and then that can inform HEA later down the pike here.
I appreciate that. Thank you, John and Chris. Venice, I have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond on any points that John or Chris made, if you'd like to.
I mean, I would agree 1,000%. I think that, you know, what works for one population doesn't necessarily have to work for others. I think what I feel like is missing is that these innovative financing solutions really being designed with borrowers or students. I think oftentimes we think about designing solutions that, you know, would help a group of learners or students, but it would be great to see some solutions that are actually pulling in the voices of individuals who are currently having to make those decisions and trade-offs to get their perspective on what would work for you, what makes sense for you, what would an ideal financing tool look like, because I think it would be helpful to get their perspective as you design these solutions.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. So, and I think we sometimes forget about that. I actually reflect on my Hill experience, and a lot of times we would talk to organizations that were representing students, but it was infrequent that we had the opportunity to hear from students directly. I think that has changed in the last 2 decades. I'm dating myself a little bit, but where student voice has become a lot more prevalent. But I think that's a really important point. Thank you. So I'm going to look quickly at some of the questions from the audience, and many of them do focus on ISAs, but I think we could sort of even broaden some of these questions to some of the other models that we've talked about today. I'm curious to hear you all discuss a little bit more about the impact and growth of innovative finance tools that extend beyond private institutions or organizations that might be offering the option. So I know, Venice, you had touched a little bit on short-term programs. Chris, you had also talked about your model in the short-term program space. But I think when we hear about innovative finance, those models tend to be associated with names of universities that we might all know around our table. Can you talk just a little bit more about where do you see the impact and growth of innovative finance really emerging in the next, let's say, even 2 to 3 years?
For me, I see ISAs as like a last mile financing tool. And so anywhere where students actually know what their career is going to be to help with that downside protection. So short-term boot camp like software engineering programs such as Holberton School, which has multiple sites across the country that are educating adult working learners to be software engineers in less than 2 years. We also see other solutions that are addressing the needs of adult learners who need more rapid skilling, so anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. I think anywhere where, again, aligning the incentives and outcomes focused programs, I think ISAs could be a really good solution there.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to what Vinny said that, especially in the space that we play in, which is, we call it skills-based, tends to be shorter term programs. One of the things that we're exploring that I think could be incredibly powerful is the role that employers can play in this, right? So the pathway to employment is much shorter than in the traditional post-secondary space. And employers, when you talk to them about, their role in creation of talent, rather than just going and recruiting existing talent, I think more and more of them are starting to understand that there's real benefits there. And frankly, it could be structured in such a way where the creation of debt for people to get these training programs is borne by employers to a large extent. Obviously, in our opinion, it would be based on performance by the employer. But I think that is an area that is ripe for a ton of innovation, and could have huge benefits.
Absolutely. I'm glad you raised that, Chris, and because we didn't talk much about the employer either perspective or integration into some of the financing tools. I know we've touched on it broadly when we talk about the concept of just risk-based financing and ISAs in general, but I think you're onto something, both with involving the employer, but also thinking about the use of workforce boards and economic development levers in communities and states. So definitely, maybe that'll be part 2 of this conversation.
Absolutely.
Let's explore that some more. I know we just have a couple minutes left. I would like to give everyone the opportunity to just weigh in sort of with a last word. So we're in, let's see, July. I had to look at my calendar. July of 2020. Where are we a year from now in this conversation around innovative finance? Perhaps where are we politically with respect to the conversation around innovative finance? And where might there be future opportunities for us to explore these issues? I think, Chris, you just touched on the employer angle. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'll be very brief. I think if I were to claim to know where we were going to be 12 months from now, I would be disingenuous. But I think there are a couple of key things. One, there are a couple of things that I'm relatively certain of. And this may not be like a rosy message that everyone wants to hear, but I think that the economic impacts from this pandemic haven't really been felt yet. Mm-hmm. I think that all you need to do is look at all of the big banks who announced earnings last week and look at the loss provisions that they took to know where we're likely going from in a credit markets perspective. So it's going to be rough sailing, and I think that is going to go all the way through 2021. I think that there is a lot that hinges on. This is a non-statement, but there's a lot that hinges on the election this fall, which when we have some clarity on that, we'll have some clarity on some of the other environmental things. But, the way that I think about it is, regardless of what happens in November, thinking about the next generation of tools and techniques to provide skills to people that lead to good jobs really doesn't change a whole bunch, right? Some of the lane lines that we have to work within will change, but the overall destination doesn't.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Venice?
Yeah, I'll just say 3 things, and it'll be interesting for all of us to come back in July of 2021 to see whose predictions won. Or
love to have you all back. Yes.
So I would say we're going to see massive consolidation across higher ed. We're seeing a lot of the economic impact on higher ed is unlike anything the system has seen before. I think we're also going to see interventions that really focus on wraparound support services. The mental health crisis that has existed will only be exacerbated due to the pandemic that adults and children are facing. And then the last thing I'll say is the federal government investment will be really, really critical. Earlier this year, there was a bill that was introduced into the Senate. This is pre-COVID, to expand access to Pell Grants to certificate programs for non-credit bearing courses. This will be really, really, I think, helpful. And I hope to see in a year more federal investment allowing more workers to get access to shorter term credentials.
Great. Thank you. John.
Well, I hope a year from now I'm out of my house and not still stuck here. So I hope this is an in-person conference.
I hope so too.
Conversation. Yeah, exactly. You know, I don't know, like, never underestimate Congress's dysfunction. So like, I mean, my hopeful side is that they're able to get some more economic packages, that there'll be some thoughtful workforce development, including ISA, short-term Pell. I worry they'll just like plus up a lot of the existing things that we know just have not been serving workers, students, and employers well, and learners well. So I hope there's taking advantage of this crisis to advance some long needed reforms to better serve learners and people. I do agree with Chris too, like we are just at the beginning of the economic crisis. And we just saw this from 2008, 2009, that it was one of the most uneven economic recoveries. And there was broad swaths of the population that were left behind. And I don't think we really know how this one is going to play out, since it's economic shock that's hitting the whole country both simultaneously, but in very different ways. And it's one that plays on just public trust and perception and confidence. And if people don't have confidence to go back out to work, to go back to school, to go back to a college, that has just lingering effects for themselves and for the economy as a whole. And I also just worry that, you know, throughout all of this, you have a lot of students asking questions now that they weren't asking a year, like students that are going to Harvard saying, if I'm just taking part in Zoom, why am I paying full price? And I think that will create, not for everyone, but for a certain segment of people, they're going to be looking for some alternative pathways in a way that they weren't just a few short months ago. And so the question is whether or not we'll have good pathways for them, whether there'll be good providers, and whether we'll have good financing mechanisms with the guardrails to protect them, but also enable them to pursue the pathways of their choice too.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thanks to you all for your thoughts and participating today. I actually do hope that we can convene again, because I do want to talk about the employer angle. I think that was a really important point, Chris, that you brought up. But I do hope that we can convene again in a year in person and revisit this conversation. So appreciate all of you joining us today, and appreciate the audience for tuning in. Thanks, everyone. Be well.
Thanks so much, Allison.
Take care.